Warm greetings, salama, dabasuhuje, Zai, and welcome back to the Izuka Podcast. After my first episode, I realized that since I spoke extensively about death and our ancestors, I thought it would be worth exploring these topics a bit more. So I wanted to examine death and grieving from an African perspective. I believe there are valuable lessons to be learned from these traditions that we have abandoned, but not in favor of modernity and Christianity. But for some, not entirely, and how a lot of people have found ways to incorporate them in our modern way of living. I think death is a theme that resonates deeply with every human being, but we are taking a unique perspective, one that offers a more wholesome and natural approach through the lens of African burial rituals. So death gives meaning to life, and I think to truly understand the essence of life and its many facets of meaning and value, one must reflect deeply on the topic of death. And this reflection is not just an abstract exercise, but a fundamental journey. In many African cultures, life does not end with death, but death is seen as merely a transition into another realm. And this profound belief transforms the way death is perceived and experienced. In the African context, death is not an end, but a period between life and the transition into the spiritual realm, often referred to as life after death. And this perspective views death as a departure to join the company of the departed, right? So the Abayele tribe in Kenya, for example, believe that the spirit of a deceased person joins the spirits of the other departed community members in Emakombe. And Emakombe is essentially the world of spirits, right? Now, Emakombe, this world of the spirits, is perceived as an external home of rest, a favorable abode far from the living, yet so near that the spirits can reach the world of the living in an instant. And as I've been looking into this, a world that's actually quite new to me, I'm finding it so interesting, reassuring, wholesome, and very enlightening. And this belief explains the meticulous preparations made for the journey to Emakombe, the world of the spirits. So what happens is the dead are washed and buried with items they may need on their journey or on their way, emphasizing the importance of correct burial proceedings, steeped in social, religious, and symbolic dimensions. So the mystery of Emakombe is fascinating. Some say it is located in the sky. Others believe it resides in the earth's bowels, while yet others claim it hovers above the deceased homestead. But despite the differing views on its exact location, the existence of Emakombe for the benevolent spirits is unquestioned. So those who do not reach Emakombe, though, are believed to remain in forests and valleys, tormented and restless. So everybody aims or wants to get to this place. Now, this understanding of life and death influences African funerals and burial practices significantly. Funerals are seen as a journey to Emakombe, and with each ritual action carrying deep significance. So these rituals, not often taught, but rather passed down through generations, ensure that even from a young age, individuals participate in naturally becoming effective mourners. And escorting the dead is considered a mandatory duty for everyone. For instance, in Tanzania, a funeral is attended by the family, tribe members, friends, and acquaintances. And absence from a funeral is seen as a gross misconduct. And in some tribes, it can lead to severe social consequences, okay, like serious punishment. And this sense of community is so strong that relatives often travel long distances to attend the funeral. Now, funerals in African cultures are characterized by a blend of deep sorrow and joy, and it's expressed through poetry, drums, singing, and dancing. However, I think it is important to recognize that the cultural diversity across the continent, and each community has its unique rituals and beliefs shaped by its specific epistemological paradigm, right? So most African indigenous beliefs view death as a natural transition from the visible to the invisible, or spiritual ontology. And the spirit or essence of the person is not destroyed, and it moves to the spirit of the realm of spirit ancestors, like I said before. And this leads us to the concept often referred to as ancestor worship, though it is more accurately described as communion with ancestors. Jomo Kenyatta, in his work Facing Mount Kenya, he clarified that his tribe, the Kikuyu, do not worship their ancestors, but they hold communion with them. And this communion is integral to their everyday life. So bringing the memory and glory of their forefathers into their present existence. And I thought that was like a beautiful description. And let me share with you the story of a man named Holala. It's an abbreviated story, but I think it illustrates and gives a glimpse of these beliefs and practice in action. So the story begins in the community of Teshi, where Holala, a beloved taxi driver, spent his life driving the streets of Accra for decades. So Teshi is on the outskirts of Accra in Ghana. And Holala drove taxis on the streets of Accra. He worked for a hotel for 3 decades. At 63, Holala passed away from a stroke, leaving behind a legacy of friendliness and popularity. And in Accra, every taxi driver knew who Holala was. And when Holala passed away, 2 of his cousins took on the task of organizing his send-off, spanning 3 days and drawing over 400 people from near and far. So a local coffin maker crafted a unique coffin resembling a Mercedes-Benz, the car Holala drove for those many years. And with the coffin ready, 30 relatives made their way to the mortuary to retrieve Holala's body. So 30 people were designated to do this. A blue and gray hearse, followed by a videographer recording the event, carried Holala's body to his mother's former home. There, 7 women took on the sacred role of preparing his body for the spirits. Now, in many African cultures, apparently the people who are allowed to do this sacred work have to be widows. And so in Holala's case, it was the same. They were armed with enamel bowls filled with cotton, bars of soap, sponges, razors, talcum powder, camphor bowls, and a plastic cup, a spoon, white cotton t-shirt, and they had large pieces of fabric. So they bathed and dressed him with care and dignity. And as they worked, they could be heard saying, "We are giving him everything so that he needs nothing in the spirit world. He lacks nothing in the spirit world." If he wants a cup of tea, he has a cup. If he wants cocoa, he has a spoon. If he wants to look good, he can comb his hair. And the women meticulously bathed Holala, splashed him with camphor and talcum powder. They combed his hair, beard and mustache. They dressed him in the 3 layers of garments, starting with a gray pinstripe pants and a gold and blue shirt. And after they finished doing this, and as mourners arrived, they came in to see him and they brought money. And they placed it in a scarf while announcing their offerings to Holala. So they would be like, "This is from this one," they would say, and after the donations, actually, let's go back. So people actually offered what they could afford. Some just few cents. Others gave amounts equivalent to $10, and just whatever you could afford. That's what that's what you would give. And all this had been happening at Holala's mom's former home. And after this process, 4 men carried Holala's body to his compound where he lived, laying him on a brass bed and adorned with silk flowers. At this point, hundreds of people came to pay their respects, addressing him directly with their emotions and farewells. So, for example, one elderly woman fanning him and wiping her tears lamented, "Holala, you promised to pay my debt. Who will pay my debt now? Who are you leaving me with? Who will replace you?" she stumbled around saying. And somebody else would say something like, you are living under whose care now? Tell us so that when we die, we can come and be with you. It will make it easier for us to find you in the spirit world. And more people kept coming, and people really sort of spoke to him from the heart and expressed whatever lamentations and farewell messages that they wanted to depart to him. And this process, after this, the procession then moved to the cemetery. Family elders placed Holala in the coffin, adding jewelry and other items to accompany him in the afterlife. Pall bearers carried the coffin to the public cemetery, led by an elderly woman who was splattering distilled palm oil on the ground. And as they approached the grave, the carers gently lowered the coffin, and one family elder prayed, "May your ancestors receive you. May your mother and father receive you in peace," because his parents had passed by this stage. And yeah, that was sort of the end of there was more, obviously, speeches at the funeral, and prayers and chantings. And yeah, the next morning, the family elders returned to Holala's compound. Their fast task was to settle funeral expenses. And then they discussed who should become the new father figure for his daughters. And after the person was identified, an elder nodded towards the daughters and declared, "You will respect him. This man is now your father. Anything you need, you go to him." And I think what also would happen, it said, was that the person who had now become the the father figure would, if there was something he could not handle, he would go back to the elders. And so, yeah, the man basically said, "Anything you need, you go to him." And when this conversation was concluded, laughter and applause anchored in the courtyard. So finally, the chief mourner pronounced one last blessing, pouring a final libation and praying for Holala's children. May you have long life, riches, and children, he said. The congregation replied in unison, "Amen." And with that, the celebration of Holala's life came to a close. Now, this story of Holala's funeral is a powerful example of how traditions and community support guide the journey from this world to the next, but also how people have found ways to incorporate these traditions in modern ways, right? I just thought to give you a little illustration of how these things are done, but also how people have found ways to incorporate these traditions in a limited way, sometimes in our modern ways. So yeah, thank you for being here and listening. A big hug, and I hope you can share how funeral burials are done in your culture, and we can keep exploring and embracing the stories that make us who we are. Thank you.